Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Got a new video for you guys today, and I'm a little bit late on this one, about a week late. Unfortunately, last week was really busy and I had a lot going on, so I didn't actually get around to this because these episodes take a little bit of time. But I'm here now and just in time because we got a new episode of Cardfight Vangaurd tonight, and I wanted to cover what happened in last week's episode, and I'm kind of happy I waited because not only do we have the official abilities of Mosa Masanori's new cards, we actually got to try them out in our last Cardfight Vangaurd video, which came out a couple days ago. So we'll be able to get into some more in-depth explanations as we go through what happened in last week's episode. So I'm gonna blow through some of the story stuff, though we did get some interesting story bits for one of the other characters, Suo, who looks like he's going to be the main antagonist of this season. Even though he's not really an antagonist from the way they portray him, but he's definitely damaged and definitely where a lot of the conflict is probably going to come from. So, start of the episode, we see that it's raining and we see Akina at school, and he basically chases Suo out into the rain because Suo basically just goes out into the rain, no umbrella, and Akina tries to cover him with an umbrella. We jump over to Masanori, and Masanori is with the plushie, whose name apparently is Gab Willius. I'm not pronouncing that. But he ends up interrogating the plushie and basically asks him what his deal is, because he doesn't trust him. Masanori is big on conspiracy, and he doesn't understand why, I'm just going to call him Gabby, why Gabby would, just set this whole thing up so somebody can get a wish without something in return. And we learn about this thing called Design Force. So Design Force is a power that has been created on Krei. So in this universe, just like in old Vanguard, Krei is a real place. And it turns out, thousands of years ago there was a war, which is funny because that is actually, the war between Shadow Paladins, Royal Paladins, and them fighting the Void, that happened thousands of years ago. Because in the actual lore of Overdress, we jumped thousands of, I think 1,000 years? It's either 1,000 years or multiple thousands of years into the future with the nations and the world of Krei, where the card game started for Overdress. That's actually like in the lore. So apparently that war covered Krei in this Design Force. And what this Design Force is basically an energy that can shape destiny. And when the war caused all this Design Force to envelop the planet, the Fated One cards were created. And Fated One cards came to Earth, and now we have the Fated Clash. Because these Fated Ones have this Design Force, and when all of their Design Force is focused into one spot, they describe it as the power of the Fated One will transcend space and time and reach the Earth, granting the owner their wish. So the way they describe this, I'm not exactly sure if this is an entity or just it's referring to the power of the Fated One, but they made it sound like it's something totally interesting. After this conversation between Masanori and Gab, he hears a knock at the door, and it's Shinobu. Shinobu was a character from Overdress. He was the Greedon player, and he was kind of a dick. But he shows up to talk to Masanori, and then we jump over to Akina and Suo showing up at Suo's house. Suho, kind of takes his shoes off, throws them all over. He doesn't care about keeping everything clean, doesn't care about the fact that he's still in wet clothes. But Akina can't help but, try to help him out. He is a big brother, he's been taking care of his sister his whole life. And he basically says, take off those wet clothes, go take a shower. He sees the state of Suo's home, and it's in shambles. There's dirty dishes everywhere, clothes everywhere. It's just a mess. And he just thinks to himself, and it jumps back over to Shinobu and Masanori. And they have a little going back and forth. I guess Masanori made Shinobu enter like a Vanguard program, and he smoked everybody because Shinobu's actually a really solid player. And he ends up challenging Masanori. Masanori agrees because he said he wants to test something out, which he ends up looking at his Fated One card, the Fated One of Taboo's Zorga Nadir. But they get down to the nitty gritty, and turn one is Shinobu. Shinobu goes first. He rides Desire Devil Gomen. He sets his energy generator and ends his turn. Now, after these initial turns, these first two turns, if you guys have watched my other recaps of episodes, I don't repeat that they, charge energy at the start of every turn. Just assume that they do, because they don't have them do it in the series. But they do end up using energy blast, so obviously they've got to get that resource from somewhere. But it's just a way they do the episodes. They skipped that phase, and in some cases they even skipped the draw for turn. But turn 2 goes off, and Masanori rides one of his new cards called Abyss Fishing. This card's actually pretty cool. So he sets the energy generator, he charges 3, and he calls 2 copies of Conceited Noble Philander. This one was weird because Philander's got a really solid skill for Masanori's game plan, and he just doesn't use it. But just so you guys know what the card does, because some of it does become relevant later. Auto, when this unit is placed on the rear guard from hand, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, discard 1 card, and then it has a continuous skill. If your drop has 10 or more cards in it, it gains 10k. He doesn't use the on-play skill, which is weird, but that 10k becomes important later, but that's neither here nor there. Masanori attacks with fishing. Shinobu doesn't guard, takes first damage, doesn't get a trigger. He attacks with Philander. Shinobu doesn't guard, doesn't get a trigger. He attacks with the last Philander, takes it again. Shinobu takes the damage, doesn't get a trigger. So already going after turn 2, it's 0 on Masanori with 3 on Shinobu. So Masanori's way in the lead. He even, talks a little smack to Shinobu, like, you just took all that damage. What's going on? So turn 3, Shinobu rides Desire Devil Boshoku. He calls a new card for Greedon called Desire Devil Alacre. Hope I said that right. He uses its skill when it's placed on the rear guard during the main phase. Energy Blast 3. Choose a card with a Desire Devil from the soul with a different name than this unit. Call it to rear guard. Obviously, they don't want you to spam call aboard, because Greedon can make use of any rear guard. It also has an auto skill where it's auto front row rear guard. When Greedon attacks, Greedon gains 5k, and if you have 4 more cards in the damage zone, this unit also gains 5k. He calls the Gomen, the grade 1 that he rode last turn from the soul, and then he goes into his attacks. He attacks with Boshoku first. Masanori guards. Shinobu doesn't get a trigger, but then he actually attacks the rear guard Philanders with Alacre and with Gomen, and Masanori just doesn't guard. He's actually like, okay, so you're attacking my rear guards. So even at the end of turn 3, the damage is still 0 on Masanori to 3 on Shinobu. But he did clear out the rear guard, so, win some, lose some. Alright, turn 4. Masanori rides Split the Preordained. This is another one of his new cards. He uses Abyss Fishing skill, so I can actually tell you what Abyss Fishing skill actually is. Auto, when rode upon by Split the Preordained, Soul Blast 1. Look at the top 7 cards of your deck, choose 1 unit and 1 normal order from among them. Reveal them, add the normal order to your hand, and discard the unit, and then shuffle your deck. He adds Gather Upon Me, You Wandering Souls. We don't see what unit he sends to the drop, but considering his next play, I'm assuming it was Roaming Prison Dragon, though he could have been discarded that for either his first or his second ride. Because now he uses the Gather Upon Me, You Wandering Souls. For anybody that doesn't know what this does, you play this card by discarding another order from your hand, and it gives your Vanguard a drive check. So now his grade 2 Vanguard has Twin Drive. Because he played an order, he gets to activate Roaming Prison from the drop. When Roaming Prison's in the drop and you play an order, you can call it out from the drop. If you called it, you can either give it 10k or give it +1 crit, one or the other. But if you did Alchemagic, you get to do both. So he gives it the 10k. Masanori then calls a new card called Abomination of Impending Karma, and he calls Seabreeze Abduction to the back row. Abomination is going to be a huge card later, but we'll cover that when he actually uses it. Masanori attacks the Vanguard with Split, boosted by Seabreeze. Shinobu doesn't guard. Masanori gets a heal trigger on the Twin Drive, and he gives the power to Abomination. Shinobu takes damage, doesn't get a damage trigger. Masanori uses Seabreeze's skill, which allows when Seabreeze boosts an attack that hits the Vanguard, you can bind an order from your drop and then add an order from your drop to your hand. So he binds Death Inviting Black Magic from the drop and adds Fill the Skies, O Branded Corpse to hand. He attacks with Roaming Prison Dragon. Shinobu doesn't guard, doesn't get a trigger, and lastly he attacks with Abomination that's been boosted by the trigger. Shinobu does in fact guard that, but now the damage is 5-0. Now the damage is 0 on Masanori to 5 for Shinobu, which is crazy to me. But now we go into turn 5. Shinobu rides average demonic dragon Greedon, uses Boshoku's skill. For anybody that doesn't know what Boshoku does, auto, when this unit is rode upon by average demonic dragon Greedon, put a card from your hand into the soul, search your deck for a card with the same name as this card, reveal it, and put it into your hand and shuffle your deck. It also has a soul skill, continuous soul. During your turn, if your damage zone has 4 or more cards, the average demonic dragon Greedon on your Vanguard circle gets plus 5,000 power. Well, the reason he did that was to turn on one of Greedon's skills by putting another copy of Greedon into the soul. So, continuous Vanguard, if your soul has another copy of this unit in the soul, the number of damage you lose to becomes 7. So by having another copy of Greedon in the soul, he now needs 7 damage to actually lose the game, which that becomes a big deal, like in any game. It's annoying when going against that skill. But Shinobu then calls 3 Desire Devil Bubsus to his back row, these bunnies. He attacks with Greedon. He uses Alacre's skill, giving 5k to his Greedon, and Alacre also gains 5k, but that really doesn't matter. Masanori doesn't guard. Shinobu gets a critical trigger, and he gives both effects to his Greedon. So for anybody that doesn't know what Greedon does, you're about to find out. But he deals 2 damage to Masanori. Masanori doesn't get a trigger. Shinobu uses Greedon's second skill, auto Vanguard Circle, at the end of the battle that this unit attacked. Soul Blast 2, move 4 standing rear guards to the soul, and if your soul has 10 or more cards, stand this unit and it gains plus 15,000 power. So all those rear guards that he called, he moves them all to the soul, along with the Gomen that he had from last turn. The only one left is Alacre. But now Shinobu does something pretty cool. So Shinobu, after moving all his rear guards in, uses the Bubtetsu skills that he just moved in. Its effect is auto rear guard. When your other rear guard is put into the soul by your Vanguard's ability during your turn, counterblast 1, choose a card from your hand and call it to rear guard. And if your soul has 10 or more cards, you get to draw a card. So at this point, I believe his soul did not have 10 cards after soul blasting and even after moving in. But what he does do is he counterblasts 3, since he had 3 Bubsus. Bubesus. I'm not going to try and pronounce that anymore. But he calls 3 more units to the back row. He's basically going for a triple restand. He calls Desired Devils Gorjo, Boshoku, and Dofund. I know one of these cards. I guess the other 2 are new. One of them is new. One of them's not. Anyway, moving on. Shinobu attacks with Greedon again. And this time, Masanori drops 2 guard from hand and he intercepts with Abomination. I didn't realize that he was actually partially setting up Abomination when he did this, but you'll see what I mean on his next turn. Shinobu gets a heal trigger this time. He gives a 10k to Greedon, he heals 1, so now he goes from 5 to 4. He activates Greedon again, moving all 4 of his rear guards to the soul, and he restands. He uses Gorjo's skill. Gorjo's skill is when it's put from the rear guard into the soul. If you have a grade 3 or greater Greedon Vanguard, Energy Blast 3, add it to your hand from the soul. The reason this is nuts is because this is actually a defensive card. It has a continuous skill. If you have a grade 3 or greater Greedon Vanguard and your damage is at 4 or more, this unit gets plus 5,000 shield. So he just added a 10k shield to his hand for doing absolutely nothing but playing the game. Shinobu attacks with Greedon one final time, and Masanori doesn't guard this one, and Shinobu gets another heal trigger, so he goes all the way down to 3 damage. So by the end of this turn, especially since he still had the crit and Masanori just took 2 more, it's now 4 Masanori, 3 Shinobu, so now Shinobu's in the lead. Now, we get a little talking shit from Masanori, and, he gets excited because he's about to go off, but then it cuts over to Akina and Sho. I'm going to skip this part of the episode for now and just finish out the game, and then we'll go back and talk about what happened after the fact. So, going on to Masanori's next turn, this turn was hype. And this made me want to try out the deck immediately, because I watched this episode and Noble, I was immediately making the deck after the fact. And I don't even know Zorga like that. If you guys saw my last video, my last Cardfight Vangaurd video, you saw that Zorga deck was a mess, and I still managed to win with it because it's that cool. It was really interesting. But anyway, he rides Fated One of Taboo, Zorga Nadir. We learned a little bit of what Masanori's philosophy is. His wish isn't anything specific. He just wants to do stuff that people consider taboo, because in his mind, nothing should be taboo. What people find as taboo and wanting to do those taboos, that's real desire to him, and that's the stuff he's interested in. But anyway, Once he rises Zorga, he then uses Zorga's skill. So Zorga has 3 skills, and we're going to go through them as he uses them. He uses the first one, which is an Act skill. Act Vanguard Circle once per turn. Energy Blast 2, bind an order from your drop. Call up to 2 cards from your drop, and they get 5,000 power until end of turn for each order with a different name in your bind zone. Sorry, normal order specifically. And at the end of the turn, those units are retired. So he binds You Wandering Souls, and he calls the 2 Philanders from turn 1 from the drop. One of them he calls to the back row, and the other one he calls over his Roaming Prison Dragon. That also becomes a huge deal, because now he retired his Roaming Prison Dragon. Because he has 2 bound orders at this point, they both gain 10k. It's not a continuous effect, it's just a one shot, so now that's the power they're going to be gaining off of that. But if he had more, they would have gained more on the call. He then uses Zorga Nadir's second skill. When you play a normal order, you can choose a normal order with a different name from your bind zone in Alchemagic. So this is interesting because originally Alchemagic required you to play an order and then choose an order in your drop, pay its cost, and then bind that order. Because you're binding your orders and using the Alchemagic from the bind zone, you're not really losing anything. So it's like whatever's bound is always accessible to you. So he plays O Branded of the Corpses from hand, and then Alchemagic to a Ye Wandering Souls from the bind. So fill this guy's O Branded Corpses for anybody that doesn't know what it does. You play this order if you have a Zorga Vanguard with a Divine skill. Choose one of your Vanguards and it gets a continuous effect. All of your rear guards placed from the drop zone this turn get 5k. So because of the way that's worded, that includes the 2 Philanders that he's just called and anything he calls after this fact. So now those Philanders are gaining plus 5k on top of the plus 10k from his first skill, on top of their own plus 10k because he has more than 10 cards in his mind zone, so they're already huge. And then of course, because of You Wandering Souls, he gives his Vanguard plus 1 drive. He uses the skill of the Roaming Prison Dragon that he retired, calls it back out, but since he did Alchemagic now, it gets 10k and it gets a critical. He moves to his battle phase, and when he moves to his battle phase, he activates the effect. He activates the effect of Abomination. So this is what Abomination does while it's in the drop. It has 2 effects. Auto drop zone at the beginning of your battle phase. If you have a Zorga Vanguard with a Divine skill, you used Alchemagic this turn, you may call this card to the rear guard, and if you call this card and your opponent is at grade 3, this unit gets plus 1 critical until end of turn. So that effect is completely free. You just had to play the game. So that's already a super powerful effect for that grade 2. But then it also has a skill on place. Auto, when this unit is placed on rear guard, Energy Blast 4, and bind a normal unit from your drop, this unit gets plus 5,000 power until end of turn for each order in your bind zone with a different name. So he binds. Unfortunately, we never see what the third order he binds is, but it must have been something that he didn't already have bound because he ends up giving Abomination plus 15,000 power. So his rear guard columns are massive right now. But he starts off his attacks with the Abomination boosted by the Philander. If we can run through the math real quick. Philander's sitting at plus 25, so it's a 33k booster, and then Abomination is sitting at plus 20, so he's swinging 63 for 2 on his rear guard column. Shinobu doesn't guard, takes the 2 damage. Masanori then attacks with Zorga Nadir, and we find out it's Divine skill. Auto Vanguard Circle, when this unit attacks a grade 3 or greater unit, Soul Blast 1, choose a column and stand it, but at the end of the turn retire those units. So he restands the Abomination of Philander that just swung. So he just restood a 63k for 2 rear guard column. Shinobu ends up guarding by using 2 heal triggers because his Vanguard is the smallest column, but it does have a triple drive, so he does have to worry about that. Masanori gets a critical trigger on his 3rd check. He gives it to the Roaming Prison Dragon. Masanori then attacks with the Roaming Prison Dragon. If we do the math real quick on the Roaming Prison Dragon, we already know that the Philander is sitting at 33. The Roaming Prison Dragon it was originally a 5k, gained 10k, so it's already sitting at 15, plus the 10k from the trigger, plus another 5k from the skill he gave to Zorga. So it ended up being 63 for 3. Shinobu uses the perfect guard on this one, and then Masanori finally swings with Abomination, which is another 63 for 2, and he ends up taking it, and Masanori ends up winning the game. Shinobu complains a little bit, but then Shinobu ends up telling him how great he is, and we end up getting a little bit of what Masanori believes. Like he asks him what Masanori wants for a wish, and he's just like, I don't know, maybe to be a god, maybe to bring somebody back from the dead, and he's just like, I just want to do something that's taboo. So Masanori is kind of tapped. But anyway, we're going to go back real quick and talk about what happened before his final turn. So we go over back to Suo'S house, and we see that an adult walks into his apartment, and he asks where Suo is. He asks if he's okay, if he's hungry, and he sees the apartment all cleaned up, all nice and neat, and he's just like, "What the hell happened?" And Akina walks out of the bath after taking a bath at his house, and he bugs out. And Akina's just like, "I'm Suho," and he immediately assumes that he's gonna say friend, and he gets all excited because I guess Suo doesn't have a whole lot of friends. We get a clip of Suo, sitting by himself in his room, and he's just like, "There's nothing here. I have nothing." There was also a scene earlier where he was looking in the mirror, and he asked, if you're like me, and you actually see the faded one of Zero, whose name I forget at this time. But after the game, it jumps back over to Akina, and we find out that this guy's actually Suo's uncle, and we get a whole backstory of why Suo's the way he is. Turns out that, he used to be a pretty happy kid, but his parents died in a train accident right in front of him, and as a defense mechanism, he kind of shut down. He repressed his own memories. He doesn't remember much of how he used to be before the accident. This is an actual real life defense mechanism, and it's actually written really well why he acts the way he does. That kind of trauma, you don't just get over that. But after hearing his story, Akina ends up sleeping over, and we see Akina in Suo's room, and he's talking to himself, assuming Suo's asleep, and basically says, he wants to try and get him to smile again, and he decides he wants to help him. But then Suo's actually awake and tells him to shut up, and Akina gets all embarrassed. It's a pretty funny scene. But the last scene of the episode was the interesting one, very interesting one. So Masanori's getting ready to leave. He's talking his shit like he always does, and he bumps into the masked man that's been showing up around the entire series, and he basically tells him, there's somebody I want you to stop, and he basically says that I need you to stop Suo. Basically, this fate of death that this guy's been talking about, that he's been doomsaying since the new series started, is going to be caused by Suo, being that he's the fated one of Zero. So that's where the episode ends, and this was a pretty interesting episode. We got a lot of backstory on one of the most, enigmatic characters that we've got so far. We get to see how tapped Masanori is. The game was dope. The triple restand from Greed on, Masanori going ham with Zorga. I did think it was a little weird that Shinobu was not defending at all, but I'm assuming he was trying to build up his resources that way he could go for the triple restand, which is actually a pretty strong move. But next episode, the episode that's coming out later tonight, is a Now episode, which means more Vangaurd Draga support, and we actually might get to see her beat some ass. So I'm super excited because for the Divine series, she's probably my favorite character, and of course, I'm going to be playing the Vangaurd Draga deck, so I can't wait to see what kind of goodies we get. But I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed this recap. Let me know how you felt about the actual episode of Cardfight Vangaurd, and let me know if you guys are still enjoying these and what kind of video you guys want me to see me do next. I might do another Zorga video just because I really like that deck and I really want to mess with it. I've already changed up a few things with some advice from other players, and I can't wait to try it out. If you guys want to check me out on social media, those links will be down below. That is it from me. I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.